Hello everybody, welcome to today's Leading Edge Forum webinar, The End of the Beginning. My name is Dave Reed and I'm the Research Programme Director here at the LAF. It's my pleasure to be your host today. I hope you're all well and safe wherever you may be. We're going to be continuing the theme recently we've had around current events for today's session. It's our view here at the LAF that we probably underestimated the threat that external shocks might pose to our organizations. And we were slowly, perhaps before this, becoming more adaptive as organizations, but we've learned recently that we probably had some fragility designed into our business, our processes, and our systems. In today's session, Bill Murray is going to explore the challenge of how we now think ahead and how we adapt to the aftershocks that will inevitably come, and potentially how we might actually start to gain some advantage from the longer term transformation that we will see post the current pandemic. So Bill is a senior researcher and advisor here at the LAF, and many of you will know Bill from his pioneering work on platform-based organizations, digital platforms and platform business models. Bill also fairly recently took a look at how we might reframe risk through the lens of anti-fragility. So more of that to come shortly. Just a reminder to you all that you can submit questions for Bill using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen here in Zoom. Bill's got about 20 minutes of content to go through, and once he's done that, I'll be putting questions to him, so please do submit them throughout the session. We should have you wrapped up in about 45 minutes, but Bill, without further ado, why don't you get us going today?
Thank you. So, good afternoon. Now this is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. Many of you will recognize those words. They're from Churchill, but they mean something today on the 14th of May, 2020. Every one of us on this call and everyone we know is at the end of the beginning. My question to you is, do you know what happens next? In LEF, we're thinking about this shock differently. Much of the guidance out there now we think is just table stakes, and we're going to point that out in the next 20 minutes. Much of what's out there we think falls short as well, so we're going to add some new thinking in the next 20 minutes. You know, recently a very smart, very cynical, very well informed venture capital CEO said to me in the last couple of weeks, tell me something I don't know. Show me something I haven't seen. Give me an angle I don't have. Now, all of you there should be saying the same thing in all of these webinars, this included. So here goes. I don't think there is a new normal. I think all the industries we're seeing have these very big structural dislocations. They're economic, political, legal barriers to trade and people flows. Other structural dislocations are failed stages in value chains or big irreversible consumption changes from people, long-term funding and liquidity holes. But these are really big structural dislocations. We've never seen so many together before. And markets are being reset. Some spend will never, ever come back. But think about this, if big change could be possible, because much of the cost of shifting economic activities away from business as usual has actually already been paid and is being subsidized by our governments. Half the work's been done on big change. The other thing is, we are going to get aftershocks. I think you know that. Second outbreaks, hard Brexits, perhaps, credit crunches, regionalized, tax hikes, tariff wars between the US and China. My colleague, Dave Michela in LEF, has a really comprehensive, really quite elegant portrayal of these interdependent disruptions. And I commend his commentaries, his webinars, and his presentations to you on this. The second thing is, everyone talks about distance. I don't think that's the most important thing. I think speed's more important than distance. I think that in some cases, the take-up of tech has advanced 10 years in 2 months. Well, that's actually what Eric Schmidt of Google says. And these aftershocks are just traveling really, really fast. Some of the government decisions that have been made recently, one I was right on the edge of, 3 months, normal decision time, down to 1 hour, 1 hour. And you look at earnings reports and you see decisions normally made in quarters, made in months, decisions made in months, made in weeks, and decisions made in weeks to days. You're going to need a bigger boat. That's the quote from Jaws. And I like it because people talk about Amazon and Jaws at the same time. Are you going to really be able to regulate Amazon? You look at Bezos's 2020 Q1 report, and he says, we're not thinking small. Are Amazon, Uber, Alibaba, Facebook, and Google, even Zoom, are they now in this shop too big to fail? We increasingly work with them or for them, and we trade on their infrastructure. But look, we had a techlash. But in many cases now, big tech firms are becoming ethical conglomerates. So I don't think there is a new normal. I don't think we can say what there is at the moment. The 3 phenomena have appeared in the last 3 months. The rediscovered old, right? So we've got community back after 60 years, thanks to WhatsApp and the home delivery of wine and cocktails hour. In World War II, families and small businesses and towns were the makers of wartime gear. In this war we've got on this pathogen, we had 750,000 volunteers in the UK. Some of them lockdown people, but town communities, small businesses, they were all making protective gear for others. So in both times, we had something that they've called this arsenal of democracy. That was old and it's been rediscovered. We've got the accelerated now. Tech is hacking wicked problems. Wicked problems are almost impossible to solve. So look at Microsoft's global social entrepreneurship program and how it's helping tech for good startups, socially responsible startups, directly address pandemic impacts. It's quite extraordinary. We've got something I'll go into a little bit later, anti-fragile ecosystems. We had resilient ecosystems, we've got anti-fragiles one. Good old Amazon, their supply chains are more than resilient. They get better every time there's volatility in a shock, because there are 2 great big flywheels in Amazon, data flywheels. And they learn what fails, and within hours, the operational systems are working better. They get better through shocks and volatility. And there's some untested new as well. We've got innovation of public sector innovation. So country level experimentation, the Isle of Wight, science done differently, massively compressed timescales, and the government taking equity in startups. Tell me there's a new normal. We've got the industrialization of collaboration, national level testing and manufacturing consortia built at speed to create or accelerate health sectors. So for the first time since World War II, the public are seeing their democratic representatives, their civil servants and their employers work at scale together and learn at scale together. There's never been anything like it. So where are we? Let me suggest where you are. You'll read all the management consulting websites, or they'll send newsletters to you. So everyone now has a 3-stage approach. Everyone. We used this framework well over 8 weeks ago with a government agency, and then a tech giant, and then a national grocer. And then it was novel. Now, I think it's just table stakes. Not everyone, though, has got the so whats in these three timescales. There's a first part called managing the shock. And that shock, that drop, has created, as we've said, something we haven't seen since wartime. Those structural dislocations, economic, political, legal, failed stages in value chains, irreversible, really large scale consumption changes. And your job in this stage is to stabilize the business and lead the business. So what? Well, what if you can draw insightful maps, Wardley maps of those big structural breaks? You'll see who's going to be idle and decline. You're going to see who's going to innovate and disrupt. And this is really important. Who's going to industrialize all that innovation and development that's going on and end up dominating the market? Wardley maps will tell you that. You're here. Here you are. You are at the back end of the stabilization phase, and you will have people that are thinking about how to adapt the organization. Now, the big characteristic of this next phase are those aftershocks. The second outbreak, hard Brexit, national defaults, tax hikes, tariff wars, each one with winners and losers. And here, your job is to exploit those aftershocks and be the best learner and be the best adapter. So what? Don't just survive them, use them. Use those aftershocks. Create options at the right option price, because it's those options that'll make you resilient. And if you have enough smart options, we'll show you what those could be later, you'll be better than resilient. You could be anti-fragile. So when you're into transforming the organization, you've survived the aftershocks, your sector could well be merging with another one. It's a high chance of that. Your government department will be working and learning at a scale unimaginable a year ago. What's your job? Your job is to reposition your organization in that new landscape, change the business model, and change the operating model. So what? Have you got the organizational clockwork to evolve? That is the real point. Have you got it to evolve fast enough? It's about speed. It's not about distance. Months to weeks, weeks to days, days to hours. Be careful, think slow as well as fast. But that's the speed this shock is making us operate. But that clockwork is things like really smart, highly automated, self-managing platforms, often put at the service of a national or local government. So if you don't have them, but you've got to use them, you better understand them. Big, fast data flywheels, machine learning operating across very big data sets with third-party data flowing in and out, but tightly integrated into your operational systems, like the Amazon flywheels that make you respond very, very quickly and improve almost in near real time. But a lot of that data will also be driven by citizens with conditions. And last of all, people who feel safe enough to imagine, because imagination can beat AI. Imagination's about anomalies, accidents, and analogies, not averages. Have you got psychological safety in your culture so you can use imagination as well as artificial intelligence? So don't cut down your options when you're managing the shock. because you'll limit your performance, you'll limit your improvement. And by the time you get out of the aftershocks, you could be out of the game. Let me say that again. Plan for aftershocks and create options while you're stabilizing. Embed options in your stabilization activities. And you can be more than resilient. You can be anti-fragile. Aftershocks and options mean you improve. How do you create that anti-fragility? So that's a very controversial word. The inventor of the term was Nicholas Taleb, who can be very controversial. But the phenomena of anti-fragility is very, very real. It's becoming understood. We set it out, as Dave said before, in a research paper 3 years ago, rethinking risk through the lens of anti-fragility. But nature's built it for thousands of years. If you're having workouts at home in lockdown, your muscles degrade, learn, and then get stronger. You're anti-fragile. But look, countries and governments and communities are building it. Look at Germany's absolutely gold standard response to this shock. It's extraordinary. A distributed, cooperative, experimenting system of health and pharmaceuticals responded amazingly. Enterprises are also becoming anti-fragile, as we'll show you in a moment. But let me just explain the terms a little bit more to you. If something's fragile, it fails pretty fast. If it's brittle, it hangs on for a bit, but it still fails. If it's resilient, it'll bounce back. So if you're watching the news and they say the term resilient, a lot of people are hoping to bounce back to where it was. But there are firms, there are governments, there are communities that are anti-fragile and are using this awful situation to improve and to get better. And that's what our talk is about today. The more options you put in your organization while you're stabilizing, the more anti-fragile you'll get. Let me give you some examples. Anti-fragile Amazon, 8 different anti-fragile mechanisms. Here we go, 2 massive data flywheels, one in asset management, one in customer management, working together to upgrade operations daily, learning from volatility and shocks. They have barbell investment strategies, T1, T2 decision-making. They're distributed, they're devolved, they have diversified business units, they have R&D in every business unit, they speculate in markets, they negotiate with the dark actors in their own marketplaces. Hire, the most advanced company you've probably never heard of, are extraordinary, loosely coupled, independent micro enterprises with extensive joint venturing, smart contracts. And this word ecosystems that we grapple with drives their entire strategy. The German health system, as I said, sensed the virus early, experimented with testing early. It's distributed, cooperative, federal. Those bodies responded swiftly. And they had a really strong bench strength in labs and pharma before the whole thing kicked off. Toyota, they had a big car recall in 2009, and it made them restructure their operations for resilience. They didn't know it, but they'd done so well that when the tsunami hit them shortly after, they built back their supply chains to be even stronger very, very quickly. And so their profits in the following years from the tsunami were 3 to 4 times the pre-shock levels, not something they would have got by being just resilient. There are stories as well about the supply chains and the operations and the dealerships in Ford, the operations in 3M, how Samsung have responded to this pandemic. They have aspects that are all anti-fragile. The more options in more places that you have, the more anti-fragile those options will be. So let's get tactical and practical with options. So here are, let's break it down, the parts of a public or private organization. And each of those, while we're stabilizing, can have options embedded in them. Let's pick an example. Go online. Yeah, everyone's going online. But what happens if you go online the whole hog? You put everything online, not just a couple of products. Take a whole chunk of your business model and put it online. Experiment at scale. Well, Nike did that in China. China is the living lab in front of us at the moment. Nike staff in China offered at-home workouts, and it's given them, when they reopened their stores, 35% year-on-year growth in its online sales. 35% year-on-year growth. Lin Quixan, the Chinese cosmetics company, redeployed its beauty advisors as online influencers, and they just used WeChat to drive online sales. February sales were up 120% over last year. So if you put a whole chunk of the business model online, that's what you can get. You can pivot like a startup on your supply side. So that, what that really means is, which new products can you make with your existing infrastructure? LVMH make perfumes, but you know, they switched to producing hand sanitizers within a few days. I don't think they'll necessarily stick with that post-pandemic, but you should hear the conversations they're having now about what they can do when they have new products going through existing infrastructure. GM modified some idle production to manufacture medical devices, and Hilton offered rooms to hospital staff and COVID-19 patients. What can you do with that? These are all incredibly socially responsible things to do. Ethical digital conglomerates. Have you got the courage to enter the sharing economy? So Amazon did hire close to 100,000 employees. It partnered with Lyft, and Lyft encouraged its underused drivers to pursue positions as warehouse workers, delivery people, or grocery shoppers. Who knows whether you'll continue that, but that kind of workforce sharing has been proven to work at scale. Can you find a societally responsible, ethically defensible way of doing that going forward? Let's hope Amazon and Lyft can do that. Scandinavian Airlines workers were offered fast-track training to help them retrain as healthcare workers to fight coronavirus. They may or may not go back to Scandinavian Airlines. That's a tough call. But there are 3 or 4 other sectors, having been retrained, they can go into now. Alibaba has a supermarket chain, Hema, and they borrowed more than 3,000 employees, which had been made redundant in restaurants, hotels, and movie theater chains. And they were trained to work as goods sorters or packagers. And Hema worked out an employee salary split with those employers. So it's not just workforce sharing, it's sharing the paying as well. But these are some of the options you can embed while you're stabilizing right across your organization, whether it's public or private. You won't be able to read all of those. That's about a half of what we've identified. This is something new. This is something people haven't seen before. This is a new angle. You can do this now. So we have an imminent research paper, shock treatment, and that'll have a workbook. That workbook will have all the best practice actions to manage the shock. Here we are now. It'll also have those practical options and more you can embed while you are managing the shock. Those options will build resiliency. But you know, the more you have, the more anti-fragile you get. And if you can be smart and work with the financial side of your business, you can get them at low option prices. Those are the investments that, as you're working through the aftershocks, will put you in a great position when you come out to transform the organization. There's no new normal. I don't think there's a new normal. I think it's not distance. I think it's speed. I think we need to think about months to weeks, weeks to days, and days to hours. But be careful. Don't run fast and break things. Think slow and carefully as well as fast. We're seeing on the news every night fantastic government actions in different countries, working with our representatives, our democratic representatives, and employers and staff at a national scale. And every week learning something and improving at a country level. How many aftershocks will we have? I don't know, but we're going to have more than one. We're going to have more than two. I don't know how big they're going to be. And they could be horrible, but they're also an opportunity if you put options there to improve. And if you can improve the business and put some of that back to the greater good, what more can you do? Shocks create dislocations. Wardley maps eat dislocations for breakfast. Aftershocks need options, and options give you anti-fragility. Thank you.
That's excellent. Thank you, Bill, for that. The Q&A is open, everybody. I've got a couple of questions, Bill, come in already, but if people want to just submit their questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, I'll put them to Bill as they come in. Bill, just to get us started, the first question is, what are the digital components needed for anti-fragility? Okay,
so in our studies, and you saw that big table of the examples and so forth, there's one component for Amazon, Haier, Samsung, etc. They all have, and that's this term we use, flywheels. They're not new to you. They're AI, ML, working across big data sets, getting better and better insights, grabbing better data sets for better insights, to deliver better actions, to deliver better results for customers, which again give better data sets. But you know, a really tight integration between those flywheels and the operational systems is what makes the difference. Some of those flywheels are still in analytics labs. Many of them are coming out now, but very, very few of them are tied into operational systems. You don't want to wait 3 to 6 months so you can put an insight into an improvement. You want to have it in an operational system. So, and that integration can be a person, it could be a piece of paper, it could be a mobile phone call, it doesn't matter. As long as the systems improve, then you get anti-fragile. You've got things like scalable infrastructure, obviously based on cloud, but there's more to infrastructure than cloud. You've got things like scalable relational database management systems. That sort of underpinning digital infrastructure, if it's scalable, if it can be automated, if it can be to some degree autonomous, it makes that whole cycle of sense, learn, respond, act much faster and much cheaper.
Thanks, Bill. Another one. I think this is a tricky one, but I'm gonna relish putting it to you. Is in terms of culture, do you see problems in moving management from resilience to anti-fragility, and how might you address the change in culture?
Well, that's an easy one. There's nothing like a little bit of success to improve people's energy for change. I think my colleague Simon Wardley has got some lovely Wardley maps about how culture changes. But from this perspective, where I've seen some of these digital mechanisms begin to make supply chains much more resilient, and then in volatility to improve beyond what they used to be, it's quite extraordinary how the small cellular teams working on the supply chains with business people and technology people, when they go through that first loop, which can take a couple of weeks, first time of put the flywheel in action, get the insights out, bang that through the operational systems, work out the kinks, put it through production, get it upgraded, bang, take 10% every time off of that cycle time. You get an extraordinary buildup of energy. And then, of course, you get rivalry. And I don't think you can do anything else other than create the right conditions, top down through, in this pandemic, just bounded optimism, and work it bottom up using some of these improvement initiatives.
Sure. What's a flywheel, Bill? Can you give some example? I know it's a term we're probably familiar with here at the LAF, but can you give some examples of what you mean by that?
Okay, so not just Amazon, but more and more of the slick online operators have this, whether it's in fashion, whether it's in grocery. And they tend to have two of these things. They have data sets that are primarily populated with data about the physical infrastructure, and data sets that are primarily populated with data that moves back on the demand side. So data that's looking at the infrastructure that moves supply through, and data that's looking at the demand pipeline. And so, for example, in the demand pipeline, it gets better and better. You're not just looking and saying, what are the orders coming in? You're going back and saying, what's the pattern of certain customer segments that are putting the orders in? What are the social profiles of the customers who are putting the orders in? And that's where you get really, really slick. And as you put more and more of that data on the demand side, and more into whatever you want to put into a data lake or something like that, and you begin to have the algos, machine learning working across it, you'll just get better insights. You know that. And those insights then need to be flipped right over very quickly to the operational systems, so they change, they make better predictions, or they avoid worse outcomes. And that means the customers or the users will change. So that gives you even more data. You put that in. And the flywheel effect is really starting from data, get better insights. Better insights improve the systems. Systems change the things that are producing the data. So you get more and better data sets. Back in the middle, boom, 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 boom. That's a flywheel.
And on just a related question has dropped in, Bill. Flywheel reminds me of the term "shi" in The Art of War, Sun Tzu, of course. I think translated into momentum. Would you agree with that comment? View?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I think Bill Janeway, who's at Cambridge. Bill, if I remember correctly, used to run Warburg Pincus. He was a speaker in an LEF November event the year before last. He's quite extraordinary. He understands financial services backwards. He's a lovely bloke. And he was the first one that picked this up. He said, he coined the term flywheel. And he said that building of algo on data, data to insight, insight to operational change to change in the real world, yielding better data to go back in. He coined the term flywheel. He actually said, and more people are saying, and you'll find the EU Competition Commission saying now, the speed at which you go up the learning curve is, of course, not a straight line. You can call it exponential, nonlinear, whatever you want. But I tell you what, you start to lift off after a while. And at some point, Bill was concerned, even 2 years ago, you won't catch up. You cannot catch up to people that have been at the flywheels for some time and have managed to get linked into their ecosystems of suppliers, the data in the market. Their insights will be so much better than other people. And all you've got is regulation to slow them down, to cut that momentum down.
Fabulous. Just one, and I remember discussing this with you some weeks ago, Bill, when we first looked at this. Is the German health service really anti-fragile?
Well, I think it is. Germany, as you know, is a very federal country, which means that Ms. Merkel, an astonishingly good politician of our age, has difficulty managing them. But there are 9 features of anti-fragility, and one of them is, well, 3 of them are distribution, diversity, and devolution, right? 3 ways of taking structure and governance and moving it out and away from the center. Germany's got all of that. It's got a very federal structure to its health system. And that worked really well. When they knew something was coming up, they all started working on it aside, and there was no centralized part that was limiting the speed at which they could all go. And they collaborate well, that's their culture. But they also had, before that, in February, there were a bunch of German labs that saw this take off, actually at the end of January, beginning of February. And they asked the German government for permission to start testing experimental testing kits right from then. And they got going and they moved very, very fast. And then you may call it redundant, other people would call it strong bench strength. The pharma industry in Germany is just embedded very well across the whole country, and there's a lot of it, and it had some spare capacity, but it took those testing kits and it pushed them right up the development curve very, very quickly and distributed them very, very quickly. So they were in an extremely good position to start testing when the first few cases came in, but they were also in a very, very good position to start swapping information between the federal bits of it. So I would say they exhibit a lot of characteristics of anti-fragility. I mean, they're at the point now where they are really exporting their knowledge of how to handle COVID, their gear, and their management systems to other countries who see them operating at a level they weren't operating at before the virus hit. So I think there's a case for them that they are genuinely anti-fragile. The health industry, the health governance, health departments in Germany are an anti-fragile system.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, it's good. Got probably time for 3 more questions I've got stacked up here, all coming from slightly different angles. So the first one is around the need to check speed against the right thing to do for all, given the evidence of who's being left behind. The public sector can't necessarily pick and choose their customers. Which wheel do they take off to fix that, in your view?
Is that phrase? We had a digital ethical tour last year, and when we summed all these super findings up, when we went to talk to all the tech for good startups and accelerators and the academics, is that summed up by one of our members. Do we really need to run fast because we may break things? Can we run fast and not break things? A answer is I don't know. We see that struggle in the papers every day. If we're trying to roll out national testing and make sure that that testing gets to disadvantaged groups, the obvious ones, care homes, but there are more. There are people who can't get to testing centres because they're disabled. If we're trying to roll out online education to whole parts of the population that don't have digital infrastructure, recently the ethics board of the app that we're creating in the UK, we're really creating 2 apps, we know that. But the app that we know about, the ethics board has just said, we are not going to get near necessarily the penetration that we want because there are so many parts of our society that don't have the digital infrastructure, not just mobile phones, smartphones, but ways in which you could access it via an internet browser and so forth. Surely it's worth a week or 2 weeks on a national rollout for an ethics board comprised of incredibly practical people who have lived and breathed technology ethics all their life to shape the design. Better still, before we actually design these things, why don't we think about the what ifs? What if there's an unintended consequence here? What if there's an unintended consequence there? So yes, fast and slow thinking, there's something in the middle. Mm-hmm. So really good thinking would be, think about the what ifs at the start when you're designing it, the unintended consequences, and engineer them out. And put a digital ethics board, if particularly on national rollouts, in place. It'll be painful in the papers and the news, but it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, great. Just one coming in from a sort of slightly different angle, but similar challenge really, is how does the zombie economy come into play here? Resisting aftershocks by endlessly subsidizing businesses which are not worth sustaining. What are the long-term consequences of this?
Oh, you saved the easy one for last, huh? Right.
No, I've got one more as well.
The zombie economy. You know, to be blunt, I don't have an answer for that, but it was interesting in the FT this morning. They're saying that treasuries in many Western developed nations are seriously looking at the workforce sharing models to see whether or not non-trivial investment in cross-training of people in, as it's a horrible word, zombie, isn't it? But somehow subsidized businesses that at some point they're not commercially viable anymore. Yeah, you've got to let that go. But if they're not commercially viable, you do one of 2 things. One is, you're not like this maybe, is there a nationalization path or a stakeholder capitalism path where citizens and small to medium-sized enterprises can invest with a not-for-profit motive and keep them going if there's a social objective? And the second thing is, if there isn't the case for that, please can we retrain the people like SAS did and find a way for them to move into other sectors, particularly now, as you know, as my colleague Simon Wardley says, and my colleague Dave Michela says, we are moving from the me to the we society. And then you wouldn't look at it as a zombie company, but just the thing before we got good.
Okay, just so one final question then, Bill, just coming at it from perhaps a technology angle. Essentially, a lot of organizations are cutting spend across the board as an understandable response to this crisis. So especially in the back office, is your view that this could be really dangerous in terms of curtailing the ability to respond to the aftershocks? And if so, how are you convincing your clients around this?
Actually, that was the hard one. All right, no. So I put up all of the big categories of things to do to stabilize. I think you're really cutting into the bone if you are stripping big cost out of back offices. I mean, a lot of back offices are pretty lean. They are pretty lean. And the improvements in back offices now, particularly if you're working with folks that do this for a living, can be made by kind of either sharing or outsourcing back office operations. So they become that kind of platform that I talked about, which is just really automated really well, learns really fast, fixes its own problems. And there are, our parent company has this. That's a bit of operating model that climbs up that experience curve. It's got flywheels in it. If you grab one of those and you use it, then your back office will start to get hold of data sets from across the company, often because it's shared services. And boy, you can spin really interesting flywheels up on that. You can begin to get economies of scale from data where you can see different supply chains, different HR views, different financial views. Why on earth would you want to strip cost out of something like that? Why on earth would you not want to automate that, to integrate that and get its flywheels going? I got quite excited about that. There you go.
Yeah, and I think just to sort of surmise as well, this is I'm always reminded when asked this sort of question about a quote I heard from a CIO I worked with some time ago who spoke about organizations get the infrastructure and the back office that they deserve.
Yeah.
And I'm always reminded of that comment. So I think now is actually not the time to be chopping that out personally. Great foundations and for transformation in the future are going to be built on very, very solid and modern and agile back offices actually. So it would almost be akin to inhibiting your ability to change in the future.
But Dave, I go a stage further. Isn't it lovely when you watch someone on video learn something like me straight away where it is? But as I think about it more and more, if you're sitting in a shared service in the center of a company, you have access to extraordinary data series and data sets. You drop a flywheel on top of that. You wouldn't call it a back office anymore. It becomes a brain in its own right.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you, Bill. Anyway, look, I promised to get people out with a bit of time before, no doubt, their next meetings at the top of the hour. So just to thank everybody for their questions, their attendance today. You can, of course, request some time with us to discuss this, what the connotations of it for your organization are. Do take time to read the commentary if you haven't already, the end of the beginning that Bill has written, and we will supply you with links to that afterwards. There is a paper, as Bill mentioned, Rethinking Risk Through the Lens of Anti-Fragility, that we'll happily supply should you be interested. And imminently, as in towards the end of this month, very beginning of June, we'll be publishing the thinking that you've seen evolve here, the shock treatment paper that will contain that CXO workbook. So with that, I thank you all for coming. I wish you a good rest of the day. Thank you, Bill. And we'll see you next time on the next webinar.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time.